All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, so what problem are we looking at last time and this time? What is happening in this class? Any ideas? We talked about it for an hour and 15 minutes last time, so certainly you should have some idea. Ethics and religion, how do they relate? That is a problem. Why is it a problem? Is there any problem between ethics and religion? Exactly, and on top of this, as we established by vote in this very class, not everybody even believes in God. So if you try to make religion as a foundation of ethics, the first question is which religion? And the second question is what should people who are not religious do? Don't you see the problem there? So clearly there is a problem. At the same time, you cannot dismiss religion. You cannot say, oh, let's just forget about it, because clearly many people are religious. And that is a problem we're dealing with and trying to understand it. So let's do a little bit of a review of certain things we learned last time and how do they relate to that. First of all, we mentioned physis and nomos for the Greeks. What exactly is relevance? What is physis and nomos? Remember, they had this debate, which Socrates tried to chime on as well. And Plato later on will try to help resolve it. And it still is not resolved. So first of all, it does relate to ethics very directly. Because there is a question, ethics. Is it according to physis, which remember is nature, or nomos, which is convention? So physis would imply that there are universal moral laws. Nature, God if you want, because that could be the same thing, right? Established them. And we just have to figure them out. Nomos, on the other hand, is a convention. It's a human law. And it basically tells us, well, if it's good for this culture, it may be bad for this culture, and there's no way for us to figure out which one is best. Remember that example from the Greeks, when one culture was eating their dead parents, and the other culture was burning them. So which way is it? If we believe in physis, we would say, well, there is one way. It's just one of them, or maybe both of them are confused. But if we believe in nomos, we can say, well, whatever works. If you prefer to eat them, go ahead. If that's your culture, nobody can do anything about it. And then what is cosmopolitanism?
Other stuff.
Exactly, regardless of culture, regardless of religion, regardless of anything. And it is somewhat different from physis, because it's not necessarily saying that there is some set of laws set up by God or some other external being. But it just says that we should have some sort of common set of rules. Regardless of that, even if we use nomos to get there, we could have a nomos, human custom, which is universal. It's just the question then is, which one? And remember that the conversation Alexander the Great had, who told him I'm a cosmopolitan? Who did he talk to? What's the name of the guy? Do you remember? Diogenes. Diogenes, the dog, who lived on the street, and Alexander was telling him that he is going to conquer the world, and Diogenes told him, why bother? Just sit down next to me and relax right away. Why go through all this trouble so that you could relax afterwards? Now let's talk about Kant, because Kant's ideas, like I said, are very influential in this sense. And they also are trying to resolve some of the religious problems. Do you remember what was the system he developed and how did it try to reconcile? So it's based on Plato. Plato, of course, thought that morality is based on physis. Remember Plato when we talked about him, the cave? What's outside the cave? The sun, which is the form of good. So that form is the same for everybody. and then it has goodness which it bestows on all those other forms, form of justice, form of everything. If you don't have a good idea of it, it's because you're confused. It's not because it's different for you than for somebody else. Sophists, on the other hand, were saying that the nomos is different for different cultures. Now, Kant is several thousand years later, but at his time in 18th century, the science became a lot more prominent. And we talked about it last time, right? Science was explaining everything more and more and more. And people were starting to lose faith completely because they thought, well, if everything is explained by science, what's the place for God? And this is the problem Kant was partially trying to resolve, even though, of course, not the only problem, but nonetheless, this metaphysics is important to understand what he was doing. Let us come back to Kant, because we will be studying his philosophy in one of the chapters, and we will talk about his moral theory, but it really stems from his metaphysics, from what he explains in the Critique of Pure Reason. So basically we have a mind, and we have any kind of object. And it seems to our common understanding that there is no problem. Like, we can be sure that there are bottles on a table, and we can be sure they look like this. But philosophers, when they started looking deeply into it, discovered that that is not so simple. We cannot be completely sure that certain qualities, for example, colors, people disagree about, certain other things they disagree about. In fact, the very fact that you are awake and experiencing things could be put in doubt. Descartes famously said that, what if I'm dreaming? Can I be completely sure? Worse than that, what if some evil demon deceiving me about everything and feeding wrong information into my brain? Just like in the Matrix, they were showing the evil agents. So what did Kant say? Remember Copernican revolution. He said, we always think that the object is just there, and whatever our mind perceives from the object is exactly what it is supposed to be. But this is where problems begin, because then we have tiny little object in our head, right? That's the idea of an object. And how do we compare that to the object? How can we be sure it reflects it correctly? And his revolutionary contribution was that he was saying mind actually contributes something to the object too. What does it contribute to the object? The form of experience. Whereas content of experience is what is indeed there. He's not saying the world is an illusion, but he's saying the world is not as we perceive it. In order for our mind to perceive the world, it has to use those forms. Some of them he called the intuitions, and basically time and space are among them. Now the word form, of course, also goes back to Plato. These forms in our mind, and this is the forms we perceive the world with, not part of the real world. That is rather Platonic, although obviously this is not exactly what Plato was saying. It's more sophisticated and developed after centuries of philosophic exploration. Nonetheless, it's a very revolutionary, interesting idea. And he thought there are such concepts as substance, for example, and even the concept of myself as empirical I, which we experience throughout our life, are all parts of this phenomenal world, phenomenal contribution. Whereas the world in itself, the world as it really is, unperceived by our mind, we cannot know. And he called it thing in itself. And that part he called nominal world. He said, we just can't know it. You can think about it in this way. Suppose you need glasses to see things. Well, when you put glasses, you see things. But then what if your glasses distort everything a little bit? The glasses would be these forms. We can't see without these forms because we can't perceive anything without them. But when we put them on, Everything is somewhat distorted through the lens of time, space, and other forms which we need in order to understand reality. Causality is also here, cause and effect. But the world as it is in itself is here. And he placed God in here, among other things, and real me, which he called ego. That's I in Greek. Ego, transcendental ego. And freedom. Like this world has freedom. Whereas this world doesn't have any freedom because it all has necessity. Everything is necessary. But you see how it solves some of the problems, because this attempt to reconcile necessity, which we see in science, with human freedom, which we seem to have. And we'll talk more about why it is important today. Freedom of the will. So this is Kant's answer. Yes, there is real freedom. Yes, there is God. It's just in this inaccessible nominal world which we cannot get to with science. Science just gives us this side. Okay, and cosmopolitanism in this case is indeed something which aspires to a single moral community, of humanity, not bound by national, cultural, or religious traditions, because these traditions seem to complicate things for us. Certain ethical principles are universal. This is what Kant said in particular about question of morality and God. If there is no original being different from the world, God. If the world is without a beginning and also without an author, if our will is not free and our soul is of the same divisibility and corruptibility as matter, then moral ideas and principles lose all validity. And they collapse along with the transcendental ideas that constitute their theoretical support. That is the problem they had, right? Everything explained by science. And it really seems like if you believe that, you can't blame anybody for anything, literally. People can say, yeah, I committed the murder, but guess what? This is all processes in my brain which are determined by the laws of physics. There's nothing I can do about them, so you can't blame me. Okay, so Kant said that God is neither provable nor disprovable. He actually went through all the famous arguments for the existence of God one by one. This is the famous 3 ways to prove the existence of God. The first one, so-called ontological argument, goes back to St. Anselm of Canterbury. That argument goes kind of like this. Let's look at them one by one. It says, well, what is the definition of God? God is the greatest thing. Right? That's traditional definition. Greatest thing. It's one of attributes, but it definitely is an attribute of God, but God is the greatest thing. Great. Now let's imagine 2 gods. They're both identical in all ways except one. This God exists, and this God does not exist. Which one is greater?
The one that exists.
Bingo. Case closed. God exists by definition. If you understand the definition of God, you know he exists. That is a proof. Now, of course, whether or not it really proves the existence of God is still a question. St. Thomas Aquinas, who we'll talk about later in this class in the 13th century, said, yeah, but how many people understand the definition of God? You really need to have a very sophisticated mind for that, and most people don't. So he came up with the cosmological argument. He said this one is maybe okay, but only for very knowledgeable people. Kant said it does not prove the existence of God at all, because he says you cannot use concept to prove existence. Concepts and existence are not the same thing. Existence is established through empirical observation, not through conceptual analysis. All this proves is that people who believe in God created a definition of God which proves to them the existence of God. It really does not prove whether God really exists or not in reality. So that's how he overthrown the first argument. Second cosmological argument, Aquinas, like I said, came up with it. It's based loosely on Aristotle, and it kind of has three different ways to prove the existence of God, all of them similar, and there are subtle differences between them, but the idea is always the same. So world exists, right? But what gave it the first cause? What created it? Everything has a cause. The world should have a cause. Therefore, there should be God. God is the cause of the world. A couple of other ways to do it. The world is developing in time, right? So it kind of moves in time. What is moving it? What is making sure time runs and things continue? God. Well, again, Kant, of course, disagreed with that too. What could be objected to this? Several things, right? One of the objections here would be, okay, so we use God to explain the existence of the world. We're saying everything has a cause. Well, immediate question, what caused God? Nothing. God always existed. Okay, why can't we just say the world has no cause and always existed? We're just taking the problem and moving it one step up. Because, I mean, if we can allow for God not having a cause, we may as well allow for the world not having a cause, and that is not problematic. Finally, teleological argument. That is the argument, so-called argument from design. Kant actually says, I have great respect for this argument. That is probably the best one of them all. And it goes like this. If we observe the world around us, we see it is organized. We see it seems to have a purpose and moving towards a certain goal. Do you think, guys, we observe that in some way? When we observe the world, it seems like it has a purpose and it seems to have been developing according to a certain plan. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to deny. It seems like that is the case. For example, evolution. Well, you may say, well, it's just a struggle for survival. Remember, at one point there was no life whatsoever. There were a bunch of rocks. They didn't need to struggle for survival. Why in the world would they turn into some sort of life and then struggle for survival and become more and more sophisticated? That seems hard to reconcile with just a random process. It appears that this process does have some certain goal, or at least is driven in some way. And that is the argument from design. Looking at the design of the world, we can say there must have been some sort of, if not creator, then certainly external force moving it. But Kant says at most, it proves to us that there is something. It does not prove to us that there is God, and certainly not God of Christianity or any other religion. At most, we can say, yeah, there is something we don't know about this. So that's basically what he said about the arguments for the existence of God. And his conclusion was, again, you can't prove the existence of God, but you also cannot disprove it. Right? You cannot be sure that there is no God. Because it does seem, especially according to teleological argument, there's something out there. There's something in each one of us too, because when we look inside ourselves deeply enough, does it really seem like we're just this bunch of molecules joined together by forces of nature? I mean, I think that there's a difference between me and this bottle. There's certainly something in us which is hard to pin, but it is kind of there, and it's hard to explain using science. Purely in scientific terms, it's hard to explain. So that would be what he concluded. And then he said, we need the concept of God. We do need this concept, just like we need the concept of self and concept of cosmos, even though we can never know them and can never prove them. To him, it was kind of like this. If we look at everything around us, it's like the dotted lines, right? And we don't see beyond certain point, like let's say this is the wall or whatever. But if we project it further in our mind, we'll see that at some point they all come together into something. So that would be the concept of God, the concept of cosmos, and the concept of self, which, according to Kant, are just the regulative concepts. We need them in order to function. If we do not believe in God and the self and the world as an organized, cosmos means organized entity, then we will have trouble conducting our life. So they regulate our life in the correct way. And the whole Enlightenment process was, at the time, very, very optimistic. This is from another work of Kant. He talks about enlightenment. He says, enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. Immaturity is inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another. The immaturity of self-incurred is self-incurred if its cause is not lack of understanding, but lack of resolution and courage to use it without the guidance of another. The motto of enlightenment is therefore sapere aude, dare to know. Have courage to use your own understanding. Does it remind you of something we talked about when we talked about Plato? Allegory of the cave? Other people carrying those figures? And you looking at the shadows. Think for yourself. Do not take anything for granted. This is the cornerstone of critical thinking. Criticize everything and try to find your own way, your own understanding, which is what we are trying to do in this class most of all too. Now, around the same time as he wrote the Critique, there was, of course, a revolution here in the United States. American Revolution. Very, very powerful message was sent. This is from the Declaration of Independence. We hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The cosmopolitan idea, all nations welcome. This is the country of the free. Come here and achieve the greatness you can. And also, because of that, the Congress was trying to make sure that no one religion or culture is predominant, does not oppress others. There is a First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So, free exercise of religion, freedom of speech, all cultures welcome, all cultures equal, no dominant culture, no dominant religion. Fantastic. Did it immediately work? No. Of course, there was still racial segregation, discrimination, subjugation of women for well over a century, at the very least. Some of it may still be with us, but of course, at least they had an idea, right? They wanted it, but it's much harder to achieve that something because there are millions of people. People were coming here with their own cultures, with their own ideas about the world, and there was still a lot of tension and a lot of prejudice, and it's not easy to overcome. We're still struggling to overcome it, and lately seem like starting to lose the battle, but hopefully not completely. So there is a question of civic disobedience too. Because of all these problems, Martin Luther King noticed that even though the ideal is with us, Constitution says all these beautiful things, but the reality is not. So what do you do? What do you do if there are segregation laws, which are laws passed by the government, duly efficient, elected democratic government? Well, civil disobedience. The idea was that you do not raise up with guns, but you do not obey those laws. at the very least, you simply disobey them. And if enough people disobey them, such as the famous racial segregation laws that black people should be sitting at the back of the bus, special seats, and enough people started being disobedient about it, disobeying this law, and that eventually led to changes. Now, this is same thing that Socrates was doing in a sense, right? He was ready to accept death and punishment because he believed in something, and he was resilient enough to say, I'm not going to obey you people if you tell me to shut up. Even though, strangely enough, right, in Crito, he seemed to say that he, in the same time, obeys the laws of the country. That seems to be hard to reconcile. But the idea is probably, again, is he was not for overtaking it with violence. It's very problematic when people start a revolution and try to overturn the government with force. Why is it problematic? Well, if we look at the revolutions, several revolutions happened in the last few hundred years. None of them was good. Like literally never. It's very bloody. Really bad people seem to take power eventually. Like in France, there was the guillotine. They started chopping off heads of all the same people who were leading the revolution at first. In Russia, it was even worse. Civil war, horrible atrocities, many years of state oppressing everyone. So that's the problem with having civil war and having revolution. Ideal solution is to avoid that, but at the same time, what do you do if the law is unjust? Well, civil disobedience, that seems to be one way to do it. Now, still back to the problem we've been dealing with. Ethics, religion, divine command theory, how does this all work together? Ethical views, should they be religiously grounded or grounded on reason? Now, there are many attempts to somehow reconcile it. So first of all, what is happening with philosophers themselves, with us? Well, this is the most recent survey, 2020. It said among 1,700, nearly 1,700 English-speaking philosophers, 19% are still theists. They believe in God. They are religious themselves. 67% are atheists, and the rest of them are agnostics or something else. What is agnostic? That is the person who is neither believes in God nor disbelieves in God, but is more kind of skeptical on the subject. In case if you're curious, I do actually consider myself an agnostic. I don't think I have enough of a reason to definitely say there is no God, at least in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not necessarily Christian God, but some God. But at the same time, I definitely don't think any specific religion answers the problem. 67% though are full-blown atheists. They don't believe in any God. And only 19%, but still, know that it is 1 in 5 are theists. In other words, they teach philosophy, they teach the same classes, and they believe in God. How do they do it? I don't know, but I'm hoping that at least they are honest enough not to be too pushy about their religion. Because obviously, if you consider yourself Christian, there is always a risk that you will be teaching the class like a priest and will be telling people to go to church. And that, of course, is a little bit not critical enough. Anyway, how many people in general are Christian? Well, another survey showed that in United States, 63% of people identify as Christian. 29% claim they have no religious affiliation, and the remaining population belong to some other religion. It's actually a lot of Christian, right? You may say overwhelmingly Christian, 63%. A lot more than philosophers, I guess, because most people did not go through all those rigorous trainings in philosophy, logic, and so on. And they do, of course, undermine all that. After you start reading Kant, after you start reading Nietzsche, and we'll talk about Nietzsche next week, it's kind of hard to continue believing in considering yourself Christian or any other religion. Not impossible. I know people who read all that, and 19% of philosophers did, and still they believe, but not as many. Not as many. So now that kind of also brings us to Euthyphro, and I hope you guys read it. This is where the divine command theory is of interest to us. Let's look a little bit deeper at it. First of all, who did the reading? Can you describe what is going on there? What is happening? Yes. Okay, very good. I'll give you the extra credit for this, but let me follow up with a few questions. Okay. So first of all, what is Euthyphro saying piety is, and why is there a problem? He gives a definition, right? Did you see the definition Euthyphro first gives? It's actually what most Greeks thought. What has been pious?
So that's why.
What the gods want, right? That actually is the definition of piety. You do what the gods want. This is how Greeks perceived it. But what is the immediate problem which also Socrates notices?
Well, how do you know what the gods want?
How do you know what the gods want? Especially since their gods were multiple and kind of naughty and in a shambles themselves. And Socrates immediately points to that. He says, gods do naughty things to each other, and they may not be very just too. So how do you know that is exactly what they want? And in fact, he's playing, like we talked about before, right? He's playing dumb there. And he's like, well, Euthyphro, you're such an expert. Just tell me. I don't know. I mean, come on, man. Explain. They even at one point mentioned something about paying the money for the lessons. Note that Socrates, it's right before the trial. It's actually when he was accused. And he is there to answer the charge. And he's like, Euthyphro, if you explain to me what piety is, maybe I can avoid the trouble myself. They're charging me with not believing in gods, so please explain it to me. And of course, as it always is with Socrates, the whole thing turns out to be more complicated than Euthyphro thought. One of the key questions there which they actually stumble upon. I don't know if you guys noticed it. Try to read it more carefully, because I mean, with philosophy you don't want to just skim it. You want to read it carefully and think about it, because there's a lot of deep thoughts, and it's amazing when you start understanding and fleshing them all out. So here's the question they actually, this is the picture of Socrates, how it all ended. He did eventually, of course, get accused and died. Here's the key questions. Are things good because the gods will them, or do the gods will them because they are good? So let's think about it for a second. What does that mean? And this is like a big question there which Euthyphro is confused about too. Being pious is doing what gods like, right? That is the common definition. But do the gods decide what they like? We can also ask it about Christianity, and actually that was a big problem which divided people in medieval Europe. God is all-powerful, right? Can God change moral tenets? Can he say that murder from now on is good? Similarly, with rules of logic, you can ask, can God make it so 2 plus 2 equal 5? Well, he's all-powerful. Can he? That's one way to answer it, right? And there were actually divisions about it. There were intellectualists. They said that God's intellect precedes his will. So, in other words, God cannot make 2 plus 2 equal 5. Even God is bound by these rules simply because it is God's own nature. It's God's own intellect, and even God cannot change his own nature. So, similarly with morality, the fact that thou shalt not kill is a commandment also applies to God, or gods themselves. In this case, note there is no difference. when they're talking about multiple gods, again, the question is there such justice which gods themselves must obey, or gods can change justice any way they want? I mean, they are gods. And note that their gods were not as powerful as Christian God, but Christian God is very powerful. So intellectualists were saying that even God cannot change it. It's the same for everybody, including God. But then how is he all-powerful? Well, because it's part of his own nature, and he simply cannot change his own nature. Now, there were also voluntarists. Voluntarists were saying, no, God's will is above God's intellect. He can change anything. He can make that 2 + 2 = 5. And he can also make it that murder is a good thing and can be rewarded. Interestingly enough, it helped science. Some of the voluntarists were Duns Scotus and Occam. You probably heard of Occam Razor. Have you heard of Occam Razor? Yeah. So he contributed quite a lot, and he was a voluntarist. And the conclusion which was reached from that is, since God can do whatever he wants, and he can set up things any way he wants, the only way to know things is to study them. Empirical observation. You cannot figure it out for yourself, as intellectualists thought. Intellectualists thought all you need to do is to dig inside yourself, and you will know all the God-given rules. But voluntarists say, no. You really have to observe what is happening in the world, and only then you will figure out what is it that God wants. And of course, if God wants to, he can also change it. So that is a big influential division they had. And the question is still with us, because really, like even if you're religious, you can ask yourself, and even today, some religious people are voluntarists and some intellectualists. Some say, no, God cannot change his own nature. And others say, yeah, he can change, do anything he wants. And if tomorrow he decides murder, adultery, all this stuff is actually praiseworthy, he can do that. So that is a big, interesting question. Intellectualists also claim that the creation of the world was preceded by the eternal forms. Remember the Platonic forms. So basically, when God was creating the world, he decided that the world should be according to these forms, and those forms are parts of God's intellect. That goes back to Plato. Plato and Neoplatonism specifically had huge influence on Christianity, and we will talk about it now a little bit more. On the other hand, voluntarists thought that the world is radically contingent. It could be any way God wanted it to be. There were no forms to follow, so God could have made it in any way he wanted. And therefore, again, observation and scientific exploration is the only way to know the world. So it gave a huge push to scientific exploration. And not surprisingly, by the way, the Duns Scotus and Occam lived in what country? England. Where's Industrial Revolution happened and Scientific Revolution? Scientific, you can say, is one country, but what about Industrial Revolution? Do you guys know where Industrial Revolution began? England. So that is where the science has have the most effect. Now, this is the 3 reasons to develop our own moral reasoning skills. First of all, we should be able to evaluate critically our own and others' views. If we all disagree about everything, that obviously is problematic. And critical approach is, like I said, the best approach. Really should rely on yourself and not on whatever you are told by anybody, including very influential figures. Number 2, believers of various denominations as well as non-believers ought to be able to discuss moral matters together. We have to somehow go across these cultural and religious barriers to find some sort of common moral view. And finally, the fact that many of us live in organized secular communities, especially in this country. And the same thing in Europe too, right? You know now Europe has a lot of immigrants coming in, a lot of refugees. Same thing in the United States. This is pretty much inevitable, but lately it is especially pronounced. And what happens then? Divisions. People come with their own understanding of values and cultures. Not everybody accepts these Western values, and people think that not only they don't want to live according to these rules of toleration, but nobody should live by these rules. And that creates tension and creates problems, and of course that is not very good. Now, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who you I'm sure know, Russian writer, has actually said that if God is dead, then everything is permissible. He thought that God is the only thing which stops us from murdering each other and being completely out of control. What do you guys think about that? Well, let's see if there is any reason to agree with him whatsoever. Because Dostoevsky lived in the 19th century, right? He died in 1881, I think. Well, how things were going after that? Good?
After when?
1881? Well, roughly.
It's getting better.
Getting better? World War I? Fantastic time. World War II? Even better. Concentration camps, burning the Jews in the gas cameras. Yeah, that was not very good. I mean, scientifically, there were great achievements. We made the nuclear weapons. Look, now we can destroy the world like this. So yeah, I mean, from the moral point of view, we do have some problems. It's not all solved. And Dostoevsky, if he was still alive, would probably say, I told you so. People don't believe in God, everything's permissible. Why not murder people? We will talk about it more next time. That first reading from Plato's Republic, we definitely should do that, because Plato again is trying to discuss it back in his time, 2,400 years ago. If there is no God, is everything permissible? Can you just literally do whatever you want? And some people may seem, yeah. The answer no could be only because there are laws, they can catch you, right? But what if you can get away? And a lot of people, that's why people commit crimes. Who commits crime and thinking, okay, I'm going to be caught for sure, but I will still commit a crime? If there are such people, they're a tiny minority. Almost everybody who commits a crime, if you ask them honestly, they'll tell you, of course I thought I'll get away with it. I thought they will never catch me. Or I didn't bother with that too much, maybe didn't think about it specifically, but it was a hope. Yeah. Without consequence. Or rather, consequence would be good. You will achieve what you want. You hate this guy. This guy is very annoying. You killed him, no problem. Right? As long as you are not caught. Like we got this situation right here in Las Vegas. I don't know if you guys followed it. This journalist was writing about this commissioner. I think he was a commissioner. And then the commissioner just put some sort of makeup and killed him. Well, problem solved. Or is it? Then police comes, and the commissioner is now in jail and looking at the life sentence. He probably didn't expect that. I'm sure if you asked him beforehand, and yeah, he would probably say, no, I'm smart. I'll get away with it. I will put the female hair, whatever, and I'll be fine. Not fine. So that's the thing which supposedly is the only thing which holds us back from murdering others. Because if there is no God, then of course the only thing to hold us is the law. But again, many people think that they can somehow fool the law. They can get away with it some way. And that is precisely what Dostoevsky is saying. But yeah. Oh, there's many problems with it. Indeed, yeah. Like hopefully we still have enough time to talk about it. One of them, yes. Like it does seem from purely religious point of view that if you not committing crimes only because in some other life you'll be punished, that is not really praiseworthy. You're just afraid of punishment the same way, only in a slightly different, with slightly different explanation, right? And there is a ways around it, isn't there? In fact, at one point, Well, we'll talk about Reformation in a few minutes, but why did Reformation start? Do you guys know? Is there a slide? Next slide? Or anyway, we'll get there. But why did Reformation start?
Why did what start?
Reformation.
Protestant Reformation?
Religious Reformation in Europe. Yeah, the Protestants, yeah, that's when Protestants emerged. Have you heard about that? Why did it begin? What did the Reformation try to accomplish? What was the idea of Reformation? Against whom were they rebelling? Catholic Church, right? The Pope. Essentially, among the first demands was no indulgences. What's indulgences? Indulgences is when you sin, and then instead of, well, not instead of, but in order to not go to hell, you pay money to the priest. There was a price list. This is how much each sin costs. Go to the priest, pay money, and you're good. There was huge corruption. The Pope, the Borgia Pope, there's a nice little mini-series if you want to watch it, had multiple girlfriends, was living a lifestyle of, a playboy, and people were watching. They didn't have internet, but I'm sure somebody saw what's going on and was like, you know what the Pope is doing there in Rome? And many priests felt this is disgusting. This should not be like this. So some of the demands they made is they didn't want to be, first of all, bound by this crazy Pope, or any Pope for that matter. They thought each person is a church in themselves. They don't have to study Latin in order to read the Bible. They can read the Bible in their own language. They can meet wherever they want and discuss God among themselves. That was, they had different denominations, but that was the common idea. And the reason was because the representatives of the Catholic Church in Europe became completely obnoxious. They were selling pieces of the bodies, Christ's body. They were selling these indulgences. And then they were living a very playboy lifestyle. Not just the Pope. There were many of them who lived very nice lives because of that. So that was Reformation, the push for the Reformation. Like, this is not good. We all believe in God, but this is not God. This is some sort of exploitation. But, of course, then other problems did appear. There was this religious struggle between Catholics and Protestants. At some points it got very ugly, like in France they had a massacre and so on. People were burned at the stake. In Britain there was a huge story about what happened after Henry VIII. Queen Mary took over, and Henry VIII, because he wanted to get married, gotten rid of the Catholic Church and introduced Church of England, of which he was the head. But then when he died, his daughter Mary, who became first queen, was Catholic, and she started burning everybody who was basically Protestant. Then she died, Elizabeth became queen and started going the other way and started burning the Catholics. So they basically, for about a century, were just slaughtering each other all the time, depending on which group is in charge. So yeah, that is not good too. Religion as a source of morality has some positive, of course, ideas about it, like it's an eternal, absolute, objective basis, but the concern here is relativism, the claim that there are no eternal, absolute, objective values whatsoever. Religion can be motivation for morality, but there is a concern that without the divine judge who punishes us or rewards us in the afterlife, there would be no motivation to be ethical. Okay, so and then the question, which God? That is a big question, right? Which one would you pick? How do you pick God? Typically through family, but is this the best way? Should you believe in God just because your parents told you you're Christian? Well, again, if you're critical, right, critical approach would be to look for yourself. Not just to listen to your parents, but look for yourself. And that still is not solving the problem though, right? Because what do you discover when you look for yourself? There's a bunch of different, I actually know a person like this. She at one point decided she wanted to be a Catholic. She was a Catholic for a while, but then got disappointed, so she decided to switch them. And it also becomes a circus, right? It's like, okay, there are hundreds of religions. What, are you going to try each one? It seems like if there is indeed God, there should be one true religion, and everybody else is going to hell. But there's just so many religions that I think the logical solution seems to be maybe they're all wrong, right? Because it's kind of quite a coincidence if only one of them is correct one. Okay, well, there is such thing as a golden rule. And some people are saying, okay, it doesn't matter, religions disagree, but the golden rule is the same for everybody. Do unto others as they would have them do unto you. So treat others the same way as you want to be treated yourself. Kant's categorical imperative, as we will see, is also a variety of this. There's a possibility for this common core of ethics based on golden rule. So John Hicks is saying all the great traditions teach the moral ideal of a golden rule. So they all kind of agree about doing unto others as you would them do unto you. Eleanor Roosevelt emphasizes brotherly love. Dalai Lama says all the different religious faiths have a similar objective: human improvement, love, respect for others, sharing other people's suffering. So many religions but one God. That's what many religious people are saying. So what would be religious pluralism in this sense? The idea that there are many religions that share values such as the golden rule. Right? They all agree about these basic things. So even though they disagree about certain procedural moments, but at least in that sense they agree. And there is hope in that case that we can reconcile somehow around the golden rule. Now, there is also the concept of value pluralism, and that's the idea that there are multiple and conflicting goods in the world which cannot be reduced to some other good, right? So plurality of values. The values really are all different. For example, love, compassion, and golden rule. How do they all work together? Are they actually compatible with each other? Or is it really not possible to reconcile them? Okay, let's try this. Let me ask you, do you think that the religions of the world can come up with consensus about shared values? Okay, but are there any problems with the golden rule? Do unto others as you would do them, do unto you. Would it always work? Like, you know, this is actually a criticism which Hegel later came up with against Kant. He said, okay, well, what if I don't mind people stealing from me? Maybe I don't mind it. You say, why would you not mind? I don't. Does it mean I can steal from you? According to this rule, I can. It's just, you know, the kind of a thief ideology. Whoever is the cleverest, that's the one who gets everything. Maybe I don't mind it. Maybe I don't mind that the strongest person is in charge, the one who can beat up everybody else. Like, if you can beat me up, good for you. Try. Right? But then I can beat up you, and then I can be in charge. And that's just, I'm doing unto you what I would want you to do unto me. If you can beat me up, be my guest. Right? I'm a world champion in boxing or something. So who want to take a shot? Right? So that is can be problematic too. This type of approach, always problematic. And there's other problems. Many differences between religions. Like Stephen Protero says, the idea that all religions are similar is a lovely sentiment, but is dangerous, disrespectful, and untrue. Because they really are not. And another reading, which I hope you guys did, brings us to the problem of evil and free will. We actually already talked about it in the first class. So did you do the reading? It does kind of goes deeper into this subject. So what is the problem? Free will and problem of evil. Remember when we talked about it? So what is traditional definition of God? Three things, right? Remember? Yeah, so he is omnipotent.
Ever-present. Compassionate.
Yes, ever-present and loving. Or compassionate, doesn't matter. Let's say loving. And this is hard to reconcile because if he is omnipotent, he can do anything. If he is omnipresent, he knows everything. And if he is loving, he would not allow evil to exist. But what's the problem? Evil does exist. So the traditional explanation, remember I also mentioned it, is free will. Human beings, and this is what St. Augustine is actually saying, free will. God gave us free will. We can do whatever we want, including evil. Well, there are several other problems which he actually addresses there. What are the other problems? What is he trying to do? Did anybody do this reading? Especially the end, the book 3. Have you heard of original sin? What is an original sin? Okay, why? What is original sin?
Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Lives.
Adam and Eve, living in paradise, disobeyed God, got punished. He kicked them out. Original sin passes on to all the human beings. We are all guilty. So, one of the explanations which a lot of Christians struggled at the time, how does this reconcile with free will? Because original sin basically says that we are not completely free. We need grace. What is grace? Anybody knows? It's like parts of the Catholic doctrine, but generally Christian doctrine. If you ever study Christianity, this is what St. Augustine was struggling with. There was a monk called Pelagius who was saying, we are completely free. And that was eventually considered heresy because St. Augustine was saying, no, we are not, because we need God's grace. God's grace is given to relieve us from the original sin. If we are not relieved from original sin, we are corrupt. That corruption is something which passed on from generation to generation because of the original sin of Adam and Eve. So in other words, we are stupid and morally bad, by definition. Now God can give us grace, but he doesn't have to. God gives grace to whoever he wants. Why did they need this entire thing? Well, one explanation here is that you can clearly see that some people do not do what is right. Why are they not doing what is right? Well, they are corrupt by the original sin. And who is corrupt and who is not corrupt depends on whether God gives you a grace or not. And he gives it to some people, does not give it to others, and he is completely free in deciding who he gives this grace to. Now, there were monks who read Augustine before that and asked him, well, we have a problem. We have a brother who has committed some terrible thing, and we wanted to punish him, but we read you and we thought, okay, but maybe God just didn't give him grace yet. We can't punish him for that, can we? Right? Because he is corrupt by original sin. So he's doing it not because he wants to, but because God didn't give him grace. And Augustine is trying to resolve this problem and explain it in some way so that it would reconcile freedom of the will with the grace. So his explanation is complicated. He says basically, okay, grace does not, you don't need grace completely. You can still get over the original sin by yourself if you really try. God can help you, and that's what grace does. It kind of removes the obstacle from your way towards God. Even if God doesn't do it, though, you are still responsible, because you should struggle. You should strive towards it. Now, clearly that is a difficult thing to reconcile, but this is what he is trying to do here, because, again, if we don't have the free will, can you even explain evil? Can you even explain what is happening here? Now, humans having free will, yeah, that creates a problem. Responsibility for actions requires free will. If we don't have free will, you cannot blame anybody for anything. But there's all those questions which we also ask about how does it relate to science, the materialism, the laws of causality. Can we truly do whatever we want? What do you guys think? Well, for one thing, obviously, we have to obey laws of physics, right? Like maybe I would love to fly in this room right now, but I can't. It's just not physically possible. So that at the very minimum. But then even within the laws of physics, don't we always have reasons for everything we do? Like, do you ever do something for no reason whatsoever? Even if you do something for no reason whatsoever, that's a reason. Yeah. Right? There's actually a pretty good movie called The Vanishing. In this movie, the guy wanted to test it. He was this nice family guy living in France, and he decided to test it. So he just, one day, for no reason whatsoever, takes chloroform, puts this woman to sleep, and digs her up the grave and puts her in his grave and buries her. For no reason whatsoever. He proved to himself that he can do it, right? He's free. But was it really for no reason whatsoever? Because you did it in order to prove that you could do it. So that was already a reason. Yeah, so that is quite a pickle there, but we do need to have something. And the original sin, it's not only the problem in Christian religion. Similar thing, Buddhists have this dukkha, or suffering, and the reconciliation of this is always problematic. All those things, religion also tries to explain, and religion suffers from problems there just as much as the rest of us do. Now, in terms of secular approach, secular means based on this world or this age, opposing to religious approach. Ethical idea is secular, is an idea that is divorced from any religion. So, secular ethics. Protestant Reformation kind of started it. I already talked about it, right? Martin Luther was the first person to nail his criticisms about the indulgences, 95 Theses, and Henry VIII, all this, we talked about it already, right? And then that's when it gets to religious toleration of the Enlightenment, when they finally decide, okay, we should stop all the fighting between the religions, we should be tolerant and respect each other. But can we? John Rawls has, that's already modern approach, argued that societies need to develop this overlapping consensus. We can actually try to really do that, to have some sort of international human rights agreed law. Because without that, we cannot coexist. We will be constantly fighting, we will be constantly struggling with each other. He thought it was possible. Now, is it possible or not? Well, Paul Kurtz, the book also mentions, he also thought it's possible. He called it neo-humanism. Neo-humanism attempt to reconcile atheists and religious believers around the global ethics. Here's the quote from him. The challenge facing humankind is to recognize the basic ethical principle of planetary civilization, that every person on the planet has equal dignity and value as a person, and this transcends the limits of national, ethnic, religious, racial, or linguistic boundaries or identities. Now, it is a great idea, of course, but there are several problems with it. One of them is a famous paradox of toleration. And we see it, right? What is a paradox of toleration? Is there reason to tolerate the intolerant? Like I said, some people come to America, to other countries, and they may be religious fundamentalists. They may be thinking that the infidels should all be shut up. Should we give them a chance to advertise their views? Like Sharia law or something. Look at the, for example, the Islam tradition, the wearing the burqa, right, covering the women. Is it okay? They are saying that this is free choice of a woman. Is it free choice? Well, it's not just countries, right? I mean, they live in families. Even if they came to a different country, let's say many of them live like in London and Paris now. Well, your family, your parents, your sisters, brothers, cousins, all do that. That is our custom. Can you say no? Well, I mean, maybe, but that takes a brave woman. It's not easy. So is it really free choice? It's not like they picked up a woman who is already 30 years old and grew up in some vacuum and said, would you like a burqa? And she said, yeah, I think I would. That would be free choice. It's not like this when you grow up from like this big to this big, and everybody tells you, you must wear a burqa. A good woman must wear a burqa. And then you made the free choice to wear burqa. Who would expect it, right? What a shocker. And there is some even different things. So this is the paradox now. Should we tolerate it? Is there a boundary? Should at some point we say, okay, your religion is a little too crazy. This contradicts our fundamental beliefs in freedom for the woman, for example, to wear whatever the woman wants. Or is there like, okay, since it's your culture, nothing we can do. That's a paradox, right? It's not an easy answer here. Fundamentalism in general, like fundamentalists intolerant of secularism and modernity. It's a rigid adherence to a literal interpretation of religious doctrines. They react against a compromise with secularism. They say, oh no, that is what infidels want us to believe. And Islam comes up in it a lot just because at least some people who practice Islam obviously are fundamentalists. There are Christian fundamentalists too, not as many now. It was pretty crazy during the medieval years, right? That's when they were burning each other all the time. Then kind of Christianity cooled down a little bit, specifically because of the Protestant Reformation and so on, and especially in this country, because this is where people were escaping to. Many of them escaped from England and France and other countries where they were burning them at the stake for these beliefs. When they came here, they said, okay, at least here we can finally live the way we want. But now if somebody comes here who is a fundamentalist and says, yeah, you should all follow Sharia, otherwise you're all going to hell. And not only that, but if you're not following Sharia, I'll help you to go to hell. Right? And at this point, should we do something about it? Like, should we actually wait till somebody blows up the bomb, or should we already stop them at the source and tell them, okay, these ideas are not welcome in our society. How about you change your expressions a little bit and tolerate others a little bit more, right? So that is the problem we're all facing. Jürgen Habermas is one of the more interesting, more recent critical thinkers, philosophers, said fundamentalism is incompatible with the democratic constitutional state. In multicultural societies, the national constitution can tolerate only forms of life articulated with the medium of such non-fundamentalist traditions. So he, point blank, was saying that is not welcome. We should not allow that. There are boundaries to freedom of speech, freedom of religion. If your religion practices human sacrifice, it definitely is not something we should allow to prosper. Otherwise, anybody can say, well, it's my religion. That's what I'm doing. I'm sacrificing human beings. Right? There is definitely some boundaries here, but there is a criticism of that too. Some people say, no, this whole multicultural thing, this whole pluralism, that's Eurocentric. That's the white man's legacy of colonialism, and they just want the Western culture to dominate everybody else. There are different varieties of this. We'll go deeper into it later on. And it is, of course, an interesting subject in itself. Okay, we're going to wrap up. So there are 2 readings for next week. Both very interesting. Nietzsche on truth and lie and non-moral sense. If you don't want to read both, I would definitely read at least Nietzsche. But I recommend doing both. The first one, very interesting discussion of these issues in the Republic. First book and the beginning of second book. I'll see you on Monday, and we'll continue this interesting discussion, talk about relativism.